I grew up in San Diego, California. Some of my favorite childhood memories was being with family. I had a great family. I loved my mom and dad very much. I had a sister and two brothers.
I grew up in Provo, Utah. A favorite childhood memory for me is that once a month we would all load in the car and we would head to Salina, Utah to visit our grandparents. We always just had so much fun doing that. And on the way home, Dad always bought us an ice cream cone on the way. And we would, a fun thing that we always did is say, "Oh, Dad, stop there." And he goes, "Oh, I didn't see it, I didn't see it." And so we'd go into the next town and we'd say, "Dad, there's an ice cream place." "Oh, I didn't see it, I didn't see it," you know? And finally, about the last stop, he would probably stop and get us one.
The way I got to Provo was playing football in junior college at San Diego City College. I was recruited by BYU.
I started school in Cedar City at SUU, but it was called College of Southern Utah. Some of my friends talked me into coming down here, and I learned very quickly that I could not live with my best friends. And so I decided to return home.
Mom worked for Big Boys, Bob Big Boy hamburger place in Provo, and a bunch of the players would go down to there and we'd order food, and Shirley was the waitress, and that's how we first met. I was pursuing my professional football level, and Mom had come down to San Diego, and I called her. She was at her aunt's, and we leaving for Spokane. My brother got a scholarship to BYU to play baseball, and I drove him up to BYU. And while I was there, somebody said, "You ought to call Shirley, see how she's doing." So I called her and said, "Do you want to go on a date?" And she said, "Yeah." So I went down to go on a date, and we went to a little soda place, and we ordered a Coke, and they were a nickel, and all I had was a $20 bill. And I handed the guy this, and it was a dime was our what we were paying, and the guy had to go back to the safe to get me change. And so we met, and we hung out a little bit on that time. Then I went home to San Diego. I said to my mom, I'm getting married. And she said, "Who you marrying?" And I said, "Shirley Nielsen." And she said, "You don't even know her." And I said, "Yeah, I do. I know her." And so we had 3 dates. She flew to San Diego, and we visited, and I flew to Provo twice. And we went on those 3 dates, and then we set a date and said, "Let's marry."
He was gone. I finished my degree at BYU, so I dated lots of different boys. And if I ever got kind of serious with somebody, my grandfather, Gifford, would come to town and he would interview that person. And he would say, "Sorry, babe, that's not the one for you. Keep looking." Well, Tom had happened to come one of those 3 times, and Grandpa Gifford was there. And so Grandpa took him in a room for about 3 hours and came out and said, "Marry him, religion will come." And I'm going, "Oh, I don't even know him. How am I going to marry him?" So I guess we just went on blind faith and got married under Grandpa's blessing.
Tom Hudspeth, who was my coach, had flown down for a game, and he said, "I want to bring you back and give you your degree." And I started coaching at BYU, and I stayed with Shirley's family in their house.
So that's kind of how we got to know each other. We lived together. So because Tom was not LDS at the time, I was going by my grandpa's recommendation. We got married civilly by my bishop. And so I just remember just a day of getting ready, and going down to they called it the Women's Cultural Center, and that's where everybody kind of got married that did get married in the temple and that. And so we got married that day, that evening, and started an interesting life.
It was a long day. I had my family in the line, and a lot of people don't know my brother, but he was standing next to me, and when people would come in, he would get their name and give it to me. And he was very inebriated as the night went on. And he'd tell me, this is Mr. and Mrs. Jones. And I put my hand out and say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, nice to meet you. And they'd say, our name isn't Jones, it's Wilson. And this went on most of the night, so it was quite embarrassing. But that was my brother Butchie. That's the way he was. He didn't care.
And so the thing that we remember the very most of all is that all the BYU coaches came through. And we were so excited that they supported us and that. And so our little niece was one of the servers, and she just happened to dump one of the refreshments down one of the wives' back.
One of the coach's wives' back.
And you're just,
We're sitting there out, in the line, and I see this happen, and I said, your mom, I said, you don't want to know what just happened.
So that was the big highlight. Tom and I had kind of a rocky start in our marriage because I was naive enough to think that he knew all about the church and that he would not drink or come home drunk. And he just happened to do that a couple of times. And so I just kind of threw his clothes out and said, you're not coming back until
Threw him out on the lawn.
until you decide to make a change.
I'm walking the streets. I have to tell you, this is interesting. There was a guy in Provo had another head. He had a big growth on his neck. And I'm walking the streets with him. And I'm talking to him about, life. And the guy doesn't even know who the heck I am. And finally I said, I got to go back and make up. So I went back and knocked on the door. She opened the door and said, if you ever do that again, we're done. And I piled up my clothes and went back in the house. Never did it again.
And so then about halfway through that year, or 3/4 of the way of our first year, our brother-in-law said, Tom, it's time that I teach you the lessons. And so he had joined the church after the first year of our marriage. And so when we were expecting Nash, we had hoped to go to the temple because at that time you had to wait a year before. And our anniversary was on the 14th and Nash was due on the 17th. So we had to wait and go to the temple on the 19th of January. And we took Nash with us.
1974. And he was sealed to us there. We celebrated our second year anniversary on the 14th of October of 73, and 3 days later Nash was born, our oldest child. And it was quite interesting. We had sat in the hospital for 18 hours while your mother was in labor. At that time, know what the child was going to be. And so when he was born, they took him cesarean, and the nurse called me over and she said, Mr. Balzer, I have your son here. And I said, we only have one name, and it's a girl's name. And I couldn't name this boy Sydney Ann. So we talked a little bit more, and I had been reading a book, and the author was Ogden Nash. And I said, let's name him Nash. And then 3 years later.
2.5, 3, almost. Then Tad came in to the picture. Tried and tried to have another baby, but Heavenly Father said, hey, you've got 2 boys. That's all you can handle. Just be happy you've got 2. And we never had another child after that.
And watching How to Raise a Girl made me the happiest man in the world that I had 2 sons. Because I would have probably killed somebody the day of my daughter.
Yeah.
The first 10 years of our life, of married life, we lived in 10 different homes.
Wow.
Every year we move to another home.
Tom got a job as a teacher and a coach in Huntington, Utah. So we moved to Castledale, and then we moved to Orangeville, and we stayed there for 34 years.
Mom said, "How long are we here?" I said, "We'll stay 1 year, and then we'll move on."
Mm-hmm.
34 years later, we're still there.
And then we moved to Cedar City, and we've been here for 4 years. First time we've ever been around grandkids, and close to grandkids, and closer to our other grandkids. We had a good life. We didn't have money because Tom was a school teacher, but I always felt like we had a good life with our kids. We never got to take them on vacations. We never got to...
I worked 2 jobs as a teacher, and then I worked on a research farm for 11 years so that we could put clothes on you guys grown up. And I just loved my children and watching them in sports and that. It was absolutely fun. My favorite thing about your mom is when we got married, I was a rounder and I was a ruffian.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody looked cross-eyed at me, I was going to go beat them up.
Mm-hmm.
And she always kept saying, "Oh, don't be that way."
One thing about your dad that I have always appreciated, he's very kind, and he always lets everybody go first in line. And he always opens the door, and he's always very kind to all the people that he meets.
It's been a tremendous ride, just a great time. Wouldn't want anybody else in my
And
life.
it's hard to believe it's been 50 years. We never thought, we started at 25, so we never thought that we would make
25 years of age.
Mm.
I think the secret to a great marriage is honesty.
Mm.
You have to be honest with each other. If you're not, it won't last.
Mm.
And you have to be loyal, and you have to care. And if that doesn't happen, and I had a good role model. My parents were married 56 years. So that was there was just longevity.
I totally agree. You have to have patience. You have to have a forgiving heart because there's hard times. It's not all wonderful and lovey-dovey, and you go through a lot of good times and you go through a lot of bad times. But like your dad said, as long as we love each other, we have a commitment to our Heavenly Father and try and raise our kids to be good boys and our grandkids to be good people. I think that's the most important thing in the world. Our greatest joy is our family. And we're so glad that we get to be close to everyone, closer now than we've ever been in our whole life.
I don't know where the time went. I have no idea. It just went. I used to tell people when I was a bishop, they'd come in and maybe a recommended review or whatever, I'd say, love your children as much as you can because you don't have them very long. And they didn't understand that. And I said, you turn around and they're growing up, they're gone. They start their families.
Mm.
And I think that that's even with your mate. We never know what each day will bring. So just love each other the best you can because you never know what will happen tomorrow.
Well, it's like I told you and your brother. Always be the best man you can be to your spouse, and always be a good example to your religion, and hold on to that. Hold to the iron rod. That's what we have to do.
I agree. I would second that. Just love your kids, support them, support your family. Family is the most important thing we have.